Russia is sending an oil tanker to Cuba, despite America placing an oil blockade around Cuba. And this could change everything. But something important is this is actually the second Russian oil tanker to bypass the American blockade and deliver oil to Cuba. I'll tell you about this in a moment, but you need to know that over the last week or so, the US President Trump has been quite vocal about, quote, Cuba being next. Trump has said after he's finished with Iran, he's going to go into Cuba militarily and overthrow the government and get control of it. Cuba, for a long time, has been a big Russian ally. It was the start of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But something you need to know is that before the US overthrew the Venezuelan president, Maduro, Cuba actually was a big dependent on Venezuela. Venezuela provided Cuba with almost all of their oil. But ever since the US invaded Venezuela and overthrew Maduro and took control of the country, they've placed an oil blockade around Cuba. They've literally not allowed any oil tankers to deliver oil and fuel to Cuba. They've done this in an attempt to start a civil war and cause the country's population to hate their government, to then support a US invasion in the coming months. Now, Russia has seen this, and Russia is a big ally of Cuba, as I've said, and they are not allowed to deliver their oil to Cuba because of this oil blockade imposed by the Americans. But 2 days ago, a Russian oil tanker delivered an estimated 700,000 barrels of fuel to Cuba. They broke that oil blockade and broke the US's trust, and that annoyed America. But rather than apologizing or saying that they won't do it again, even though this risks a war with America, Russia has decided to double down, and they're sending another one. Russia said, quote, a second one is being loaded right now. We will not leave Cubans alone in trouble. But you need to know, because Cuba is actually supporting Russia doing this, obviously, the chance of a US and Cuba economic deal now has dropped on Polymarket to just 12%. That's a huge decrease, and it would also suggest that the US tensions with Cuba are going to get worse because of them now working with Russia. But something that you need to know, which to be fair kind of makes sense, is why Russia is allowed to get away with this. The US, as I've said, has imposed an oil blockade. Any ship that tries to deliver oil to Cuba gets turned around, and it's not allowed to. But the Russian oil tankers have been treated differently. This Russian oil tanker that landed there 2 or 3 days ago wasn't stopped by the US Navy. That might actually be because America not respects Russia as so, but they might fear them in a way. I can imagine that America does not like the idea of stopping Russian oil tankers, because that would annoy Russia. And so Russia has realized this, I think, and that's why they're now sending a second oil tanker to deliver fuel to Cuba. And if this pattern continues, it means that the oil blockade around Cuba will not only fail, but Cuba might start to do a little bit better. And that means it's going to be a lot harder for the US to invade because the people won't support it then. But as this escalates over the next few months, leave me a follow, because I'm going to keep you up to date on everything that Russia does, Cuba does, the US, etc. I cover all of the news from around the world.